Please help me to welcome Rabbi Zalman.
I need to give you a preamble, which is as follows. I happen to be a Kohen, so that means that I have not attended a Tahara myself. So the work that the Chevra Kadisha is doing, and what I know about it, comes to me from having studied about that, and in fact, having guided some people in their doctoral work. Foremost of these is Simcha Raphael, who did a dissertation for his doctorate on Jewish teachings on the afterlife. And it's an important book because in many ways the people who used to talk about, who represented Judaism to the world were left-brain people who studied in left-brain seminaries and who had a sense that when you're dead, you're dead. And there's only one life at a time, and they didn't like things that had to do with the afterlife and with ghosts and with neshamas and stuff of that sort, and certainly not about reincarnation, dibuks and gilgulim, all of these things which they consider to be superstitious stuff. And you can still see in some books of Jewish philosophy and history where people like Heinrich Gretz spoke of the people who had something to say about the deeper levels as if they were people fleeing from enlightenment and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, we have had stuff like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and when people said nobody ever came back to tell us what's going on, even Hollywood has managed to show us about some of the things that are happening there. And when I think of Ellen Burstyn's wonderful movie, Resurrection, as she describes and shows that tunnel walk to go through in which she sees relatives and so on and so forth in ways that when she came back and told about it, people didn't believe. I heard personally from people who were on the operating table, in other words, their body was on the operating table, and they were able to report conversations that were going on with the people who were working as a team on her operation. One of the doctors whom she hadn't seen before, in other words, before the operation, came in and she was able to identify her and say what she did. And that freaked them all out because they're not used to being able to hear stuff of this sort. I heard about Olam Habe and all these wonderful things that people told yet as a child. But the time I began to take this much more seriously was when the Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was reporting about the book that's called Ma'avar Yabok, the crossing over of the river, Yabok. Remember where that comes from in the Bible. It is Jacob who is crossing over before and then has to wrestle with the angel. And that was a book that was written by Reb Aaron Berachia of Modena in Italy, who was hired. Now, when we think of Italian Jews, we don't have such an idea about what were they into. But if you remember a little bit about who they were some great Kabbalists. But the same Kabbalists also had in their congregation a balletto, a scuola da balletto, a school for ballet for the girls there. In other words, there was, and if you hear the music of Azaria Min Haedomim, Edoardo da Rossi and Salomono da Rossi, you hear Palestrina in a Jewish form. In other words, those Italians were pretty good.
Yes.
it so happened also that the Chevra Kadisha in Modena hired this person, the tzaddik, Reb Aaron Berachia, that he should teach them about these things. And here we have a fantastic compendium of how to deal with the people during their dying phase and after, and how to prepare the body, and all these wonderful things. And of course, the states in which the soul is in the afterlife. You may have seen a picture of a rabbi that Rembrandt painted. His name was Manasseh ben Israel. He was the one who traveled to England to talk to Cromwell to allow Jews to come back to England. He wrote a book, Nishmat Chaim, in which there are sections of the book in which he also talks about what happens in the afterlife and so on and so forth. Early on in my work, I started to write about these things about the afterlife because it was necessary that people should hear about that. I'm going to let this hang right now. Now I'm going to go to something else. In order to hear what I have to say, if you don't sing a niggun before, you're going to hear it not with the heart and only with the head. So there was this chassid in Riga who invited friends to come to Suda Shlishit, and he taught them a niggun and wanted to make sure that they knew the niggun and they would be able to sing the niggun on their own. And when they were finished, they sang it once more, and then he died. This was his goodbye niggun, and it's a beautiful niggun. I'd like to sing it to you, and the second time around, hum along with me. I'm not going to die afterwards. Not today, okay? It may be a good day, like the Indians say, but I'm not planning on it. Da 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 ram da 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 na da 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 na da da na da da na da da na da 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 ti ra ra na da ra da ra ra Tira-ra, na-ra-ra-ra, tira-ra-ra, tira-ra, na-ra-ra-ra-ra, tira-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra, na-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra, tira-ra, na-ra-ra, na-ra-ra, ay na 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 tire ra 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 tire ra ra da ra 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 tire ra ra naray nay naray nam ya na 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 nam ay ra 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 ay ra ta ra ra ta ra 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 ta ra 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 ta ra 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 ti ra 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 Tira-ra-ram, tira-ra-ram, tiram, da-ra-ra-ra, na-ra-ra-ram. Hi, na-ra-na-na-na-nam, hi, na-na-nam, hi, na-ra-na-na-nam, hi, na-ra-ya-na-na-na, na-ra-ri-ram, hi, na-ra-na-na-na-nam, hi, na-ra-na-na, na-na-na-nam, Ti-di-da, na-da-da-da, ti-da-da-da. There is this guy who said it in Yiddish, "Wir sind alle Chaverim in der Chevra Starbers," which means we are all colleagues in the society of those who die. You know? And that's a very important thing to come to terms with, because you cannot do the inner work that you have to do as you grow older in spiritual eldering, for instance. It is absolutely necessary to come to terms with your mortality. But look how different it is when you say mortality and you talk about the left brain. Oh, it's an idea, you know? But here I'm on the gurney, and they're taking me into the operating room, and I have to come to terms not with mortality, but with dying. You get the understanding? The feeling in the guts is way different than when you do it in the abstract in this way. So there is a big difference between the attitude toward death that they have in emergency rooms and the attitude toward death that they have in hospice. Just pay attention to that difference. In the emergency room, the whole team gets busy. Adrenaline is high. You do what you can do. Save life at any cost. And at that point, despite the fact that the bean counters don't want to make a lot of trouble for the hospital, that they should expend a lot of money, but at that moment, they're not counting that. They're not doing that. And with that energy of trying to save life at any cost, when that gets transferred to the later phases of life, they're not doing anyone a favor. It happens that there are some people who, and I've had occasion to talk to people before they died, and sometimes I would say, "Are you tired already?" And they would say, "I still want to try something else." But from the moment on that they said, "I'm tired, I had enough," death did not seem to be a threat for those people. On the contrary, it was like saying, you know, "Come, get to me, let me go." A little funny thing about, I'm going to come back to what I would tell you. One of the funny things, though, is I used to serve as a shochet way back when I lived in Fall River, Massachusetts. And I would travel to Providence, Rhode Island, and serve there behind a butcher shop as a shochet. There were the people who were the chicken pluckers, you know, and when they delivered the chickens, they thought of them as merchandise, you know. They didn't think them of living beings. They didn't give them any water and so on and so forth. It was really hard. I would send the chicken pluckers out, and I talked to the chickens. They know the rabbi is talking to the chickens now. And I would say, "I'm not coming to kill you because I want you to be dead, but I want you to have an opportunity to enter into a human being and be part of davening on Shabbos and so on and so forth, and rise up to a higher level." No, I would check my knives and be sure they were really the way it should be. The guys came in, and usually they would start talking about the exploits of the night before, which wasn't the right kind of a thing for a shochet to want to hear at that point. So I would begin singing, "Joshua fit the battle of Jericho," and they plucked the chickens with the spirituals. So I learned one spiritual from them, which I want to sing to you right now because it really fits the situation. Bum ba 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 bum. Death come a riding to my mother's door. Hey, old woman, is you ready to go? And my mother, she went down to buckle up her shoes, and she went down to the Jordan River, and she said, hallelujah, I've been redeemed. I've got my traveling shoes. Boom, 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 boom. Death come a riding to my father's door. Hey, old man, is you ready to go? And my father, he went down to buckle up his shoes, and he went down to the Jordan River, and he said, oh yes, my lord, I've done my duty. I've got my traveling shoes. Boom, 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 boom. Death come a riding to the sinner's door. Hey, old sinner, is you ready to go? And the sinner, he went down to buckle up his shoes. And he ain't got no shoes. And he went down to the Jordan River, and he said, oh no, my Lord, ain't done my duty, ain't been redeemed, ain't got my traveling shoes. Now, you can understand that behind that song, there is an element that has to do with unlived life and with regret. And part of the work that we can do in Chevra Kadisha to help people with that is to let them voice it. Because to have to go without voicing it is very, very hard. The vidui, the confession that we have to help people say before they die, in which the main words are, may I be forgiven for all the wrong that I've done, utehei mitati kapara lechol avonotai, and let my death be an atonement for all my sins. That had a very powerful element to it. It is good when somebody is there and can hear that confession and can say along with that. You don't have to get into details and say, Ken yehi ratzon, Amen, in such a way. Or to repeat the formula that we find in Hatarat Nedarim. Hakol machul lach, to be able to say it's all forgiven and so on, to be able to say that. It isn't only in Roman Catholicism that this happens, that confession and a deathbed situation happens, but I read a novel in which there was a description of Aztecs who used to have a priest whose particular function was, and I'll say it as I found it in the book, the shit eater, who would come and be with a person and absorb all those things that were wrong. Because to imagine that we were born to be, not to learn. How can we learn? The only way to learn that is biologically set for us, Bucky Fuller pointed this out. He said, you can only learn from mistakes that you have made. When schools don't give you a chance to make a mistake, when they want you to regurgitate information, that's not a way in which to learn. Life teaches us. Life is a biological teaching machine, and life teaches us about things. And how does it say? In the Talmud says a person doesn't realize anything about what he did wrong. He doesn't come to his mind until he has made a mistake first. So we need to learn in that way. But on the other hand, when the time comes and a person feels burdened, whatever we can do to help him, even while they're still in their body, how much more so do we need to talk about helping them afterwards? We'll get to that, okay? I don't know if you have ever asked yourself the question, what would I like to have for my last half hour in my life? with whom would I like to be, and with whom would I not want to be at that time? It's like that funny story about Yankele is dying and his wife is there with him, and he says, afterwards, to give the house to Sammy. And she says, why to Sammy? You should give it to Bernie. And one thing after another, he says this, and she contradicts him, says it should be the other one. Finally, he loses his patience, says, who's dying after all? It's me. So that element of having people there who want to tell you at the last moment, noch etwas, to burden you with, I would like you to withhold that. Even the good stuff that speaks in the second person. When I was making that recording that is Graceful Passages, I spoke in that recording in the first person, not in the second person. The Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks always there in the second person. Oh, well-born one, you are going to enter into this place, and giving you ideas about how to deal with the bardo states and so on. But I wasn't doing it this way. I was doing it because I saw myself as if I were on my deathbed, and how would I want to say goodbye? And finally coming to the words, and I let go. Let me read this to you because it's worth hearing that. Anyway, if I find it, I'll read it a little bit later. But I want to say that I brought you a whole bunch of things, and I will give them over to you, Reb Ruth. A Tahara manual that I got from Libby Botero, and some other material here of previous conversations that I had with people about doula work and so on, so that you can have it in your files, and with the permission to go ahead and copy whatever is useful for them. I don't see it at this point handy, so I'll leave it for the time being. Interesting conversation in the Talmud. When one rabbi asked the other one who had passed, will you come back? He asked him before, will you come back and tell me what's happened? He says, what was it like? He said, it was like taking a hair out of the milk. Walking out of one door and walking into the other. Ramdas has a good way of saying it. Dying is, nobody ever failed at it. You always will do it right. So the question is, in what state do you want to be when that happens? There's a possibility of saying, like Woody Allen, I don't mind dying as long as I don't have to be there. Or the other one who might say, like the client, the patient of Kubler-Ross, who said, Ich will mein Sterben erleben. I want to live through my dying. I don't want to be out at that time. It's an event, it's a unique event. And who wouldn't want at this point to see what is that like? Now, the thing that happens is that we most of the time have the sense that when the heart stops beating, or there's no brain activity, that the thing is over. So I want to say that the field of energy that is around the body doesn't stop right away. I was having a conversation with Jeffrey Dan, an acupuncturist, who was telling me that when he was learning acupuncture, and he was in the gross anatomy lab, his colleague was working on the other side of the room with the kidneys of the cadaver. Was at the same time that Jeffrey touched the kidney points in the cadaver, and the other guy said to him, "Hey, what did you just do?" That he felt a tremor in that. So the notion that it's all over with the last breath is not quite the way we go about doing that. And that's why we need to have Shmira, okay? The basic reason for Shmira on the outside, that's to say, each thing has a pnimi and a chitzon. It has an external reason and an internal reason. The external reason is to make sure that animals will not get to the body and hurt the body and so on and so forth. It'll get buried in a good way. The internal reason is a different one. And now I'm going to go and take a little detour. Around the time when my Rebbe passed on, I lived in Fall River at that time, and I was so involved in trying to read everything I could put my hands on about the afterlife. And if you go into a public library that goes on the Dewey Decimal System and you look at 133, you are going to find a lot of material on the afterlife. When I started to look who had written, which name came up as being so full of material about that, it was Emanuel Swedenborg. Have you heard of that name? Emanuel Swedenborg wrote 2 volumes of Heaven and Hell, but he wrote Arcana Celestia, which translates into Heavenly Secrets, and there are 22 volumes of that. I wrote to the Swedenborg Foundation at that time, and I got all those volumes. And what an interesting midrash there is on the Chumash besides there. But his description of what happens is really amazing, because he points out that the same way as people need help on this side, they need help on the other side. And so that there are souls that are set up with that task to be like, if you will, social workers on the other side, to help the people to get oriented to living without a body. One of the things that we do, just go back to that notion that I was telling you before about the operating room and the hovering of that spirit, of that awareness over the operating table. They were able to see, but they were not visible. Now, how do you say that in Hebrew? Ro'eh ve'eno nireh. He sees, he is not visible. And that's one of the reasons why we cover the mirrors during Shiva time, because we believe that the spirit, where would one go at first if they don't know yet the way to other places? They'd be hanging out around. I'm sure all of us would want to say, who comes to the Shiva, It's like that joke they tell about the guy says, "Can I have one more of those cookies before I die?" And his wife says, "No, I made them for the Shiva," right? But wouldn't you want to eavesdrop on the people, what they had to say and so on and so forth after you've gone? And then say about, "Oi, they hired this rabbi, he didn't even know who I am, and he's talking like this, There's this joke that goes on about the guy who's talking about great things about a guy who was terrible to his family. And finally the widow says to the son, "Guck no, rein dort im Box. Zirette wegen mit Sanders." Is he talking about the one, my late husband, or is he talking about another person? Because, so these kinds of things about what's going on. But there is also a certain amount of fear that comes with, look, you had dreams in which you were flying. You had all kinds of dreams in which you were naked and walking around. what is this business about dreams that we are thinking about? So when my Yotam was about 5 years old, he said, Abba, what happens to people when they die? And I said, what do you think? And he said, well, I think we have two lives. We have a wake-up life and we have a dream life. I think the wake-up life stops and the dream life continues. You know, and what a wise thing for him to say at that time, because you can see that you have sometimes nightmares also. Take the word regret. It has to do with pulling back. It schleps you back to things. So I wouldn't want to have to visit a lot of my regretting places. And now comes the story. Some people quote it in the name of Reb Moshe de Leon, and some people quote it in the name of Rabbi Elimelech of Lizhensk. A man comes to him and says, Rebbe, I've done every avera in the world. Everything that the Torah says you shouldn't do, I've done. And I want to do tshuva, I want to repent. I don't want to have to pay for it in the other world. So he says, well, according to the things you tell me that you have done, you need to be punished with a capital punishment of sreifa, which means to get molten lead poured into your mouth. And the guy says, okay, do it. Muhammad Mezuman and Rebbe Elimelech said, come on, not so fast, you know. You have to do a lot more tshuva beforehand, and for the next year I will tell you what you have to do between fasting and praying and restitution and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the year, we're going to do the execution. The guy does everything that he has to do, and by the end of the year, Rebbe Elimelech puts him in a chair, ties him down, and puts a blindfold on him, and says to him, there is already the molten lead next to him, and says to him, open your mouth, and he says, Shema Yisrael, and makes a confession, opens his mouth, and Rebbe Elimelech pours in something in his mouth, but it's honey. So the man says, why do you do that for? I was prepared to die. He says, at this point you don't have to anymore. You've already done it. This story gave me a strange idea. If I were to be able to ask the male members of the Chevra Kadisha to do me a favor, I would like him to do a Tara on me while I'm still alive. Think about that, what that would be like. I can't imagine that this would only clean the body. Right? I have such a sense of how this would take me through. Not moving, let them do with me what needs to be done. Even the sentences that are being said. When my legs were hurting from arthritis, and now somebody says, Shokov Amudei Sheish, using the sentences from Shir Hashirim, praising my body for having been at my service for a lifetime. And that I should be able to appreciate that, all that. And then to be able to say that with the pouring over of the water and all that, to be able to say, Ay, Rebbeinu Shalom, what a mikveh that would be, you know? At least once in a lifetime, when you get older, that would be a gewalt to do. I think when we think of people having bar mitzvah at 83, you know, that would be a good time for the Chevra Kadisha people to do such a tar. I know that people would say this is meshuggah, you shouldn't do that, you know, you are inviting the Malach HaMovis and so on and so forth. But I can imagine how much easier it would be to die when the time would come after having experienced something like this.
I think the Spartan do it at the age of 60.
Pardon?
The Spartan, there's a Spartan minhag to do it at the age of 60 to do a Tara.
Atara, I didn't know that. See, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Shekibanti. Yeah. So that's wonderful. If you can tell me the makor, I'd love to look it up. Thank you so much. Ah, Abrocha. Oi, what she has in her head, and the footnotes on her sforim on the side. A blessing on you. Okay. So I want to go and say something about during the time that the body gets prepared and so on. Most of the time we already discount the presence of the person because we only see the body and we don't think the person is there. And I think that one of the things of Shmira would be to keep on doing that which we got from Swedenborg, to be able to say, don't look back, look ahead. There are beings waiting there for you. Reach out to them. Every one of the Hasidic stories that we have about people who passed on, and what we get later on, that they said, yeah, when you take me to the Bet Din Shel Mala, to the justice where my life is going to be weighed in the presence of God, you know, hey, sinner man, where are you going to hide you? You know, you become, and life is all transparent, and then you're in front of that to which you can't give excuses and so on and so forth. That they all would say, I don't mind to be judged, but please have my Rebbe there with me at that point. So to be able to reach out to friends who went before, and to be able to say, at that time, even to remember and to say, I would like to have mein guten Freund, you know, my Rebbe, my teacher, to be here with me and to hold my hand, as it were, as I'm going through these things. If you are of more monistic level of spirituality, you may also want to say, Rebbeinu Shalom, I don't want any Gan Eden, I don't want Olam Haba, I don't want Gehenim, I don't want Gan Eden. I just want to merge back into Ein Sof. Li'ishtava begufa de Malka. Pode Adonai nefesh avadav velo yeshmu kol hachosim bo. God redeems the soul of all his servants, and they will not be held guilty, all those who take hold of him. Remember that wonderful sentence? I'll repeat it with me. Pode Adonai nefesh avadav velo yeshmu kol hachosim bo. So there is that element of being like this lady was singing, hallelujah, I've been redeemed, you know. I've got my traveling shoes. The social customs that happen at Shivit need to be refined. Look at the way in which the friends of Job come after he has gotten whacked. They were sitting with him in silence for 7 days. And then they didn't start talking, although the book of Job tells us a lot of things of what they had to say. It was Job who begins to talk first. So there is something about being able to tell people who come, don't try and cheer the people up. If you can sit with them in silence, you may be able to, in that silence, you can send them support. What they need is energy given from the heart to be able to say, you're grieving. It is hard work. You can't get over it. We have 7 days, we have 30 days, we have 3 months, we have a year. It takes a while to do that. And there is a sorting out that happens, that people are often not aware of, because we get a Yerusha, we get a legacy from our parents that comes to us after they have passed on. And I'm not talking about physical legacy. It happened to me here in Boulder. 1975, I was here at that time for the Summer Institute that Trunkpa had, and my father, Olav Shalom, passed on at that time. So they took his body very quickly to Israel for burial, so I couldn't get to Los Angeles in time for that. So I sat Shiva here. What was so wonderful was all the Buddhists who came out of the woodwork to help me have a minyan. So Ginsburg came, and Joseph, and all these wonderful people came to help me make a minyan. I asked, since Kaddish was a great poem that Ginsburg had written, I asked him to read for me Psalm 49, which you say at the house of a mourner. He read it like he had written it so beautifully. And there I was finally with Aleinu, and I came to the words, Shehem mishtachavim lahevel velarik, v'anachnu korim mishtachavim modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They bow down to, translated, to breath and to emptiness. And we bow down to the King of Kings. And I saw it suddenly like this kind of binocular vision, that here was Buddhism and here was Judaism. There is breath and emptiness, and there's King of Kings, and they all become one thing. It was an amazing moment for me. It's one of those moments that, how would you say? I want to bring it back with me of Yennevel not to forget that, okay? So then I get out after Shiva is over, and I'm driving along, and here comes a black young guy with his car from the right side and cuts me off at the left, making a turn. I had nearly had a collision, and I was cursing away in Yiddish. Schwarze Chayes, gibt es noch Cars? So I pull over to the side, calm myself, and started to say, where did this come from? And then I said, Papa, all the wonderful things you left me there are good, but this one you can keep. Because during Shiva time, during the year, there's a lot of birurim, a lot of things that we have to sort out in us of what do we want to keep and what do we not want to keep of the legacy that we have. And anybody who is prepared to help somebody during Shiva time and can manage to sit in quiet silence, and if you can tell the people who come to visit by preparing maybe a sheet and say, please keep this in mind when you come to visit. Sit there, be calm and quiet, offer a generous energy to the person, be open to receive what they have to say, because if you flood them with your stuff, it's not going to be helpful. When you're in a receptive mood, then you can receive from them what they need to pour out, and that is really what is helpful at that time. When I was in Fall River in New Bedford, we used to have the shul that had the daily minyan. So whoever needed to say Kaddish would come to our minyan. And I considered that to be the Kaddish college, because these people were now assuming in their family that next level in which their father was there before. And so they knew so little about how to do things. I'd come over to them and offer a pair of tefillin. They would come and put on the little bikinis and sit in the back of the shul, waiting to Kadash, so they should be able to say the Kaddish and then run away. And they hated the fact that we made them wait till the end of the service for the Kaddish. So when I brought over the tefillin, they would say, I don't believe in it. No, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, they don't want to argue, get into the argument between which kind of tefillin to wear. I found out that when I visited them during Shiva, and not at a time when the house was open for people, and I would show them how to put on the tefillin, how to take them off, how to put them on, take them off, until they really had it. And the skill was there. Once they had the skill, they believed in it. So I found out what they didn't believe in is making a fool of themselves in front of other people, like not knowing. So it's an important thing to be able to help people out, to say, now that you are in that situation where you have to assume responsibility for being the ritual agent in your family, come, let me show you how to make Kiddush, let me show you how. This is part of the ongoing work that you can do during that time. When my Rebbe passed on, one of the things that the Chevra Kadisha has to do on the day Zayin Adar, when the annual meeting and the meal comes up, is to go to the cemetery and ask all those people who were buried during that year for forgiveness in case they slighted them in any way. When the Rebbe passed on, we were, after the Tahara was done, we were walking by the shrouded body, and we were told that we not only have to ask forgiveness for ourselves, but to forgive him. Now, at first, this troubled me. What do you mean? We have to forgive him, the tzaddik, and so on and so forth. But that he had to be in this lifetime, in this position, and I had to be in this position, that already needs something to be forgiven for. And there is much more. So can you imagine that if you come to the home where someone had, Cholila v'chas, taken their life, and the family is in this terrible guilt, grief situation, and then you can say, when nobody else is there, that's very important, only the family, to be able to say, allow me to be a speaker for the dead. That being is here. Remember, as I was saying before, thank you. Thank you. Baruch atah. And knowing that that person is there, if you can tune in, and that's not something that's a public thing, it's clear. If you can tune in, then you can say, I, as speaker for the dead, ask you to forgive me for the pain I caused you. And I forgive you too for not understanding the turmoil I was going through and the problems that I had. You can imagine that if you were to open up that Pandora's box, that you can't leave right away. That you would then have to stay with the family and let them work, and they would cry and they would go through all things that they have to go through. And then that's not over, because at the end of the Shloshim, sit with them again and ask, how are you doing with your process about that? What do you understand now better that you didn't understand before? I don't have more to say about the Tahara, except that during Shmirah, it would be important to keep on even speaking to the deceased and to say, I can say Tehillim, I'll be very glad to recite the Psalms. And I brought some copies of the English translation that I did of the Psalms, and Let me read you one so you have a sense of what it sounds like, because I didn't like the way in which it sounded vouchsafe and bestow, the King Jamesy stuff. This is Psalm 90. Moses, a God's man at prayer. Master, you are our home each time we are born again. Before mountains emerged, before earth and space were born, from cosmos to cosmos, you are God. You bring us, poor weak ones, to death's door, and you urge us, return Adam's kin. You bring us to death's door, and you urge us, return, O Adam's kin. In your gaze, a millennium is as yesterday gone, like a watch in the night. You flooded us with sleep, morning had us as wilted hay, blossoming at dawn when we were young, only to change at dusk when we get old, all wilted and dry. Your wrath makes us panic, your anger confuses us. When I think of God's anger, not that I should think that way, but that comes from an understanding, a projection on God, more of the father part than of the mother part. Can you imagine if you were to think of God as mother, as Shechina? And they say that when you die, you see the Shechina at that point. Think it differently, like you're coming home to mother. But nevertheless, for all our crooked places are open to your gaze, our hidden stirrings are visible to your inner light. That transparency in which nothing can be hidden, no excuses can be offered. We note all our days fleeing from your ire, our years are fading like a fleeting thought. When I look back, how quick my life has gone, in a way, just like it says here in the book. Our lifespans are 70 years, if hardly 80 years. The gain is struggle and offense. Soon we are chopped down, dispersed, and gone. Who can estimate the extent of your age? Fear of you paralyzes us. We don't have to be afraid if we take care of the next part. Make us aware enough to treasure our days. A wise heart brings vision. Limnot yameinu, limnot yameinu, limnot yameinu, kenoda v'navi levav chokhmah. Limnot yameinu, kenoda v'navi levav. Gladden us no less than you made us suffer those years we endured such harm. Oh, that we could see your design clearly, your grandeur in our children. One of the things that Vonnegut has in a book, Cat's Cradle, I don't know if you read that, it's a wonderful book. There he has some people who belong to a religion called the Bokononians. And they have a nice way of saying the prayer before they die. God made mud. God made mud. And he asked that mud to stand up. Lucky mud, lucky mud. And describes all this. And now this mud has to go. And then he says, at the end, I'll be able to find out what my wampeter was. What's a wampeter? A wampeter is the pattern of my life. Where did it fit into, in the big picture? I want to know what my wampeter was. And I want to be able to meet all the people in my karas, in my destiny group. All the people I had to be able to do and see the picture clear. So that's why, that we could see your design clearly, your grandeur in our children. To see also, not only to the past, but to look ahead and to see where in the chain, Tzro HaChayim, in the chain of life, was I needed so that there should be able to go a generation that is getting closer to a messianic world. Yeah. May your kindly presence, Lord, be ever pleasant for us. May our hands' effort achieve their aim. Please let our efforts result in good. So when you sit at Shmira and you read some of the Psalms, then as you reflect on them, just as I have done here, you might want to address it to the person who has passed. Another thing to do is to, when at the end of Shiva, we ask the person to get up from sitting Shiva and we walk with them around the block, begleitend the neshama, to say goodbye to the soul, to free them to go on, so that they shouldn't be earthbound anymore. We also say, "Zos sein a guter Better für uns." May you be one who will intercede for us. And you might be able to say that right then and there during the Shmira. I know that you're worried about your kinderlach. I on this side of life and you on that side of life. Let us now pray for your children. So I'm coming to the end of what I wanted to say. I'm ready for some questions. And I want to say, in the same way as we were talking about everything else, after Shmira, and after you've done your mitzvah, it is always good to find a way of giving some tzedakah. Tzedakah tatzl mimoves, you know? And usually the interpretation is, if you give tzedakah, you won't die. But that doesn't make sense, right? But if you don't want to have death to cling to you after you've done a mitzvah of this sort, then give some tzedakah. So that will transform the whole thing into something else. And I would want to say that when you are with that person, that you might say something else. If there is anything that you need, that needs to be done for you and you didn't have a chance to share before, allow yourself, get permission to appear in a dream and say what it is that you need. We're going to be doing Yizkor tomorrow. What is that all about? I mean, the day afterwards. What is that? Well, at Har Hashem, they'll do it tomorrow. But what is that all about? It isn't merely to say that, remember, often we say Yizkor and it said, because I will give a certain amount of tzedakah, something for tzedakah, but people don't do it. So what happens is if you don't follow through, your prayer becomes really a nothing thing. In fact, it becomes worse. So not always should you say, may God remember the soul of my deceased so-and-so on, because of this or that, but you can also say, because I will do an act of mitzvah other than tzedakah sometimes to help them in their way. And so today, I want to give some tzedakah too. One of my students died recently in Toronto, and I want some of the merit of this session to go to him, to Banish. And there are some people who are ill in the hospital and who need a refuah, and I want some of that merit to go for their healing. And I hope I have your permission that you will say, Amen, Kain, Yehi Ratzon. Now, if anyone has a few questions, Reb Ruth, you come here, please. Would you call on the people and then...
Another question back there.
Why did they bury the Rebbe in America, not Eretz Israel?
Please repeat.
Why did the Rebbe get buried in America rather than Israel?
We need him here. And I'm not kidding about that, you know. Even I were talking about where do we want to have our karka. And it was a big question because I go through all the things that had happened to me in my life. There was a time that I wanted to have my remains cremated and the ashes to be sent to Birkenau so that they would mingle with the ashes of my cousins and uncles and relatives that they were there. I know that some people were very angry, and there were some Chabad people who called me up because it was in a paper in Detroit, and they wanted me to retract it, and I said, I'm not going to retract it. Because the feeling that I had about that, if for God is necessary to give me resurrection because my bones are still here, the Rebbeinu Shalom can do all kinds of things. And if he's not going to resurrect the people who died in Auschwitz and Birkenau and Buchenwald and, all those places, then binach moichel the teufels, then I don't want it. That was a feeling that I had. But then it got to the place of all kinds of things, what is best for the family and so on and so forth. And then I started to think about what feelings I have for all of you here in Boulder. And I felt this was the happiest place in my life that I was. From Vienna, I had to leave when I was young. And all the other places I was, there was something not fully there. Here, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to make myself more holy or less holy in this place. So, po eshev ki yivitia, I'm quite happy that my remains should be here. So I have a sense that when the Rebbe came to America and created what he created here, that he wanted to have access to that. But I'll tell you another story. After the Rebbe passed on, I came back to New York from Fall River, went to the cemetery, and prayed there. And then I came back to 770, to Eastern Parkway, and there before you come from the cemetery, you wash your hands. Washing my hands outside, and the one, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, who became the Rebbe afterwards, sees me come in and says, you were Biskiven of oil, you were at the cemetery, and I said, yes. No, may you have gained what you prayed for, and I said, if people won't interfere. He asked me, what am I afraid of? I said, I prayed for three things. I prayed we should have a Rebbe, I prayed you should be the Rebbe, and I prayed you should be blessed with children. By this time, he and I both were crying. And then he said, but we have a Rebbe, what difference does it make? Whether he's in this world or in the other world. And I said, why did God hide Moses so no one knows where he's buried? So Joshua shouldn't be able to send people out to the cemetery. Okay? In other words, you gotta be it. Okay? So there'll be a time when I'm gone, and the people who have to be here, they will be it. V'nomar Omein.
Ariella?
Well, to start with, we're not going to let you go so easily. So, because you're such a gift to the world and to all of us, so you better make reservations with that. I mean, ask permission before you decide.
Don't do that.
No,
Really,
no.
I'm now saying,
okay.
don't do that.
I'm just
It's not.
expressing love.
I'm speaking very, very clear.
Yeah.
The worst thing they can do for somebody is to put on chains on them so they can't go where they have to go.
No, I apologize. Then.
Okay.
I'm just expressing love.
I
Just
understand.
from my heart.
I understand
But what I
reason.
want to say is, the average person who doesn't know much, and it's most of us, is afraid of death and dying. Until I read your book, From Aging to Saging, and some other material that you recommended there, it sounds like the greatest adventure in our life, and I'm totally looking forward. I mean, the way it sounds might be strange, but I am looking forward to that adventure. What I wanted to ask is your opinion about cremation, because it's really not a Jewish custom. How do you feel about that?
Well, I want to say, I know that what I'm going to say is not popular, but there is a place in the Tanakh where it says that one of the kings died, and I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly the place. and that they made him a Sreifa Gedolah. I want you to understand what happened in India. India got denuded of trees because all the cremation that took place over there, and that's a real problem. So I think one of the reasons in Eretz Yisrael, if they didn't do the reforesting that they did, it would be very, very bad. But the Gemara says that the hardest thing for the land was that they kept goats, and the goats didn't allow for the trees to grow because they started to eat them up, before they had fully grown. So I think one of the reasons why they were so much against that was that. If you're talking about how the bodies were preserved, we also know that they had ossuaries. Today, when you're talking about a cemetery and you hear that the Haredim will say, you mustn't dig it up, you mustn't do this. But they used to do that. They used to dig up what was left of the bones, and they put them into a bone casket. It's called an ossuary. And in fact, not too long ago, there was an ossuary found in which there was an inscription that they claimed that this was Jesus' brother, Yaakov, because of what was written on top of it. So they would take the bones and put them there. In other places, they used to later on have the towers, bone towers in Europe, and they would unbury the people. I have a feeling sometimes I don't want Eretz Yisrael to become the cemetery place, just as I don't want to see all asphalt over for cars to go. There must be some green stuff too. At one point I was talking to the people at Eilat Chaim about creating a cemetery for people in the leadership of Jewish Renewal there, but in the woods, not too. There is this terrible cemetery between Brooklyn and Queens. If you've ever been through that, it looks like a terrible gray place. So I don't know what to say. It depends what a person's hergesh is. If your hergesh is like mine was at that point when I was saying, I want the ashes to be, or at least some of the ashes, to be sent there and to join the ashes of those who have gone before. I have a feeling, may it not be for a long time, but when it comes, that's not such a bad idea. And I think the people in the Chevra Kadisha here who have taken a different tack than the people have taken, let's say, in Denver, who have said we will not do a tara for somebody who's going to be cremated. I think that's a terrible thing. Okay, call someone else.
Is there some kind of closure ritual that you can recommend for after doing tahara? Maybe not immediately, but after a few months or
That's what I was
some
saying
point.
is about staka. Yeah. There's also the wonderful thing about a mikveh is just that, In the time of the temple, you would go to the temple and they would sprinkle you with the water and the ashes of the red heifer in order to purify you again. But that's not quite the way in which it's... You are so eager to speak. Speak.
Hi. In 1991, my mother died, and I was unable, for a lot of reasons, to go to the.
Louder.
I was unable to go to my mother's funeral in 1991.
Yeah.
But it was so weird because one night I was sleeping, and I didn't hear a voice, I didn't see a vision, but I felt my mother speaking to me, saying it's going to be all right. You're going to get through this. And somebody told me once that means when you're very close to someone, this happens. I woke up sweating. I was like, God, what has this happened, Is that a current thing?
The answer to this one is so beautiful. William James, who wrote Varieties of Religious Experience, says there is only the thinnest film between us and the other world. And there is a whole bunch of material of dreams that happened in which people came and taught different kinds of things. So you should be very glad for that. I want to say, if you're interested, I talked with Eve. She's prepared to give you a session about teachings about the afterlife and some of the imaginal exercises that would go with that. So I wanted to announce that for you.
Thank you.
Please, there's someone else, Karen, I think. wants
Also,
to
this
speak.
lady.
As we mentioned earlier, we have a little trouble getting people to do to sit at night, and I think part of the problem is that we've been raised to be afraid of like dead bodies at night. Can you speak to that in terms of sitting shmira?
Give me a moment, please, okay? We have a very narrow range of sensitivity feeling, and often we don't know how to distinguish a certain level of ominousness from fear. There is the sense of an uncanny presence that you might experience at the time that you're there, which is just not much different than the dream that you had. In other words, it gives you a physical feeling of that there's a presence there. You are being seen, as it were, you know? You're being noticed. When that happens, people have a sense that, oi, you know, what will they do to me? Do you know what I'm saying? The startle reflex that comes. I give you an example. By the way, there's the word yirah, and when people speak of fear of God, it's a mistaken thing. It means respect. I'm being seen. The sense that I'm being seen by God makes me behave differently. Okay? That doesn't mean that I have to be afraid. And the same way, I don't have to be afraid during Shmira when I feel that. That's why I was saying it's necessary to address it and to say, oh, I'm aware that you're here. Please don't worry about it. We are doing what we have to do. Reach out for those who are coming for you from the other side, and to say that can reduce a lot of that. And I think that's part of the training of the Shmira people, to say, when you feel that uncanny feeling, do not be afraid. It is a different sensation. It is something that is much more poignant and ominous than something that is threatening. Thank you.
This lady over here.
I came to hear you speak about 18 years ago when I was first widowed, and I spoke of how upset and terribly in grief I was. And you comforted me, and I want to thank you, because you gave me peace. You gave me the feeling that when God picks up the soul, it is not the end of everything. And we have a problem in Cheyenne. There was one man who sat singing the Psalms all night with the body, if it had to be overnight. And now he is gone, and we have very few people in Cheyenne. We have no one doing that anymore. And I see how helpful that would be. So I think Dr. Bloomberg and myself, we will see if we can reinstitute some way to do Shmira.
Thank you.
We have the continuing tradition of Tahara for the last 140 years.
Yes.
Okay, Donna.
Rabbi Zalman, in the book Living Fully, Dying Well, you spoke a little bit about how a lot of people look forward to dying because they hear of all these beautiful near-death experiences and it's all going to be angels and love, and yet you say in reality there are stages we are going to be going through on the other side that can be very intense and very difficult, and I'm wondering if you could speak more about that.
Okay, so there's one thing that I didn't talk yet about that has to be, as I told you, about the teachings about the afterlife. So let me go through a little bit about that. At the moment of death, they describe that the Malach HaMoves, the angel of death, is full of eyes. It's like you're being seen from every angle at that point. Then they describe something that says you have to separate your identity from your body. That's called chibut hakever, the problems of the grave. Because if not, when the worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, like the song goes, you feel it. Kasha rima lamet kemachat bebasara chai. Like a needle in a living flesh, so does it feel when the worms are there. But that's only when the soul is still saying, I want to be in the body. I want to say that the hardest thing for people who suffer pain before they die is that that they're afraid that this is going to be la'olam vayed, that forever they're going to be that. When my sister Alea Shalom was dying, she was in great pain. And when I was saying to her, Schwesterle, soon you'll be out of there, because that's the element of being able to say, I will not identify anymore with the body when I'm done. Okay, is very important. Now, what happens next? According to the description comes the kaf hakela. Kaf hakela means a catapult, but the way in which to describe it is almost like the terrible angels are playing like football, soccer with the soul, tossing it from one end of the world to the other. Now, that's the description, but psychologically, what does it mean? Rabbi Elimelech has a wonderful interpretation. He says, Vayigash Elav Yehuda. A Jew wants to start davening. That's how he translates Vayigash Elav Yehuda. He says, Bi Adoni, look what's going on inside of me. Ki chamocha kefaro, yedabano avdecho dover. Let me tell you what's going on for me. Sometimes I'm like you. I feel so holy, so divine. And sometimes I feel like King Pharaoh. In other words, that thing in which we have been, take a look how much we have taken in a lifetime of pictures, even the movies that we see with violence and all that kind of stuff. And that's all lodged in us. So before a soul can go anywhere, that has to be shaken out. That's called dvarim betelim, things that are not worth anything. So these angels shake it out. And I can say, if I want to hold on to that, it's so much like Buddhist vipassana in a way, to be able to say, thank you, angels, you're shaking me out. Okay, I'm very happy. I'll get rid of all that stuff. Oh, is there so much lodged in my head? I want to be butter of that. But then, what's left over, it's like, imagine if I was wearing a nice linen suit, and I was rolling in the mud. And now I want to wash out my linen suit. Before I can do that, I let it dry out, and I shake out all, and everything else. When I've gotten rid of all that, then I can put it into the laundry. Okay? So that's how they describe that after the kaf hakela, after you get rid of the dvarim betelim, then you get into Gehenna. Now, Gehenna gets translated as, as hell, but it's really purgatory. But I don't like to say even purgatory. I want to say the laundry. I go through the laundry. And sometimes you go through a schwitz, if you have been to a sweat lodge. You feel you can't take another breath and stay in there. And the prayer that you make at that time is very, very strong. And I think that's a very special thing to be able to do when you get there. So part of the preparation would be to say, when you get there, say, all my troubles, Lord, soon be over, I'll wash it out, get it out of my system. I'm gonna wash that world right out of my hair. That you weren't even aware of its consequences. There's a beautiful teaching I heard from the Baba Rebbe. It goes something like this. God pays a person according to his actions. How does it go? And for the tzaddik, he gives pri me'alalav. He gives the fruit of their action. Whereas for the wicked, he only gives them for their action. So he says, come on, doesn't he favor the tzaddik, in a way? Why shouldn't the wicked have to be paying also for the extent of the damage that they have done? So he gives the following answer. He says, when I steal $1 from somebody, I only want the $1. I'm not interested in the results of that. I just want the $1. But when I give $1 to somebody and help him to have food or schar limud for the children or something like this, I'm not interested in giving him $1. I'm interested in giving the result of the $1. So God pays you for the result of that. It's a beautiful teaching, okay? When I start going to the place of what are the results of the actions that I've done that are good, take a look what I got back just now. How wonderful it was. I didn't remember that interaction between us. But could you imagine when the time comes to see that movie, and to see how much it has helped over that period of time, and so on and so forth. And I don't know what's going to happen from this conversation that I have with you, but there are going to be fruits of that too. And to be able to see and watch that would be wonderful. I think it's also an illusion because it can go much higher than that, but that's all right.